Eric Thomas adjusted his son Caleb's bow tie as they stood in the priority boarding line. His wife, Mia, watched with a quiet smile, one hand resting on her husband's arm while the other gripped her carefully chosen designer bag. Today was a landmark in their lives, first-class tickets to Paris. A reward for years of hard work building their consulting firm from scratch. The small, crisp tickets in Eric's pocket weren't just slips of paper. They were symbols of resilience, perseverance, and the promise of new horizons. Caleb, barely 7 and brimming with energy, could hardly contain himself as he bounced on his toes, his wide eyes fixed on the gleaming plane outside. "Mom, Dad, look at the big plane. Do you think the seats turn into beds?" he asked, his voice rising with excitement. Eric chuckled, smoothing Caleb's freshly ironed shirt. "Remember what we practiced. Little man, sit up straight, use the right fork, and always say please and thank you." "Yes, Dad," Caleb recited. Proudly, Mia's smile grew, her eyes warm with pride as she watched her son soak in the experience with wonder. It hadn't been an easy journey. For the past 15 years, Eric and Mia had poured themselves into their consulting business, sacrificing weekends, skipping vacations, and making every dollar count. Now, this trip was their reward, a long-awaited chance to show Caleb a world they had only dreamed of as kids. They had planned every detail with love and care, wanting Caleb to feel as special as this moment truly was. Today was more than a flight. It was a memory in the making, a story they would tell for years. The gate agent's voice crackled over the intercom, calling first-class passengers to board. Eric took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of everything he had worked for. He reached down and took Mia's hand, exchanging a glance of shared triumph. Together, they stepped forward with the grace and confidence they had earned, ready to savor every moment of this journey. As the agent scanned their tickets, Eric noticed a slight pause, a flicker of hesitation in her smile that disappeared just as quickly as it came. He pushed it aside, chalking it up to nerves, but a familiar weight settled in his chest, a quiet tension that sometimes accompanied moments like these. He knew the feeling well, a kind of unspoken, hovering question, but he pushed it aside. Today was about them, about celebrating and showing Caleb the world beyond limits. Caleb tugged on Mia's hand as they stepped onto the jet bridge, his eyes full of excitement. "Mom, are the seats really beds?" he whispered, as if he had to keep the magic to himself. "All that and more," she replied with a grin, guiding him down the narrow path. "You'll see, honey, it's even better than you can imagine." As they reached the entrance to the first-class cabin, Caleb's jaw dropped. Luxurious leather seats, polished wood accents, and personal entertainment screens greeted him. Turning his awe into pure delight, he scrambled into his window seat, running his hands over the plush fabric, his eyes wide with wonder. Eric and Mia shared a smile, the thrill of the moment brightening their spirits. This was what they had worked for, the dream they had carried together through countless late nights and setbacks. Watching Caleb's joy made every challenge feel worthwhile. Here, they were not just passengers. They were a family making memories, bound together by every moment, every struggle, and every triumph that had led them to this. But as they settled in, Eric felt the weight of eyes on them, faint but present. A woman in a sharp blazer clutched her handbag a little tighter as they passed, while a businessman in the next row glanced at them, frowning at his ticket as if he were second-guessing the seating arrangement. Mia noticed it too, but she focused on helping Caleb adjust his seat, her smile never wavering. She had dressed with care today, in a tailored blazer, pearl earrings, and minimal makeup, a quiet reminder of her dignity and confidence. But the subtle glances were hard to ignore, those slight shifts and sidelong looks she'd come to recognize over the years, small moments, barely noticeable, but they're all the same. Today, though, she refused to let them define her or her family. "Mom, look at this button. It makes my footrest go up." Caleb's voice brought them back, cutting through the tension like a ray of sunshine. "That's right, honey," Mia replied, her heart swelling with love for the little boy who saw only wonder in the world around him. Eric settled into his seat, glancing around the cabin as the rest of the first-class passengers filed in. This was their moment. They had earned this, every second of it. Eric leaned back in his seat, taking a steadying breath as he glanced around the first-class cabin. The polished wood panels, gentle lighting, and plush leather seats set a luxurious stage for the journey. Caleb was already busy, pressing buttons on his seat with the eager fascination of a child seeing magic unfold. "Mom, look, it reclines all the way," he exclaimed, adjusting his seat into a cozy bed. Mia laughed softly, a blend of pride and tenderness in her expression as she leaned in to help him with the controls. "You're going to be a pro at this in no time, sweetie." But Eric's gaze drifted past them, catching a flicker of motion as a woman in a fitted designer dress nearby clutched her purse closer, her knuckles tightening around the straps. She offered him a fleeting look, one filled with that familiar, dismissive suspicion. Across the aisle, a man in a suit peered at his ticket, then at Eric and Mia, as though he were searching for some kind of mistake. Eric's jaw tensed, but he quickly masked his reaction. This was a day for Caleb, a day to remember and enjoy. They had waited too long, worked too hard, to let anything ruin it. Just as he turned back to his family, a flight attendant approached. Her crisp uniform was perfectly pressed, and her professional smile seemed genuine at first glance. But as she neared, there was something in her expression, an unspoken wariness, a hesitation that lingered just a moment too long. "Good evening," she greeted them, her voice polite but distant. "May I, see your boarding passes, please?" Eric's gaze flicked to Mia, whose smile remained warm and steady, though he could see her fingers tense slightly. Caleb, blissfully unaware, was too busy exploring his seat to notice. "Of course," Eric replied, his tone controlled and calm. He reached into his pocket, retrieving the crisp tickets and passing them to the flight attendant with deliberate care. He'd anticipated moments like this. It was a sad reality that being questioned had become almost predictable in spaces like these, where subtle boundaries were often drawn. The flight attendant, Lisa, examined the tickets with unnecessary thoroughness, her eyes darting between the papers and their faces. Seconds stretched painfully, her scrutiny lingering longer than it ever had in any routine check Eric had experienced. Mia's hand found his, her thumb gently tracing a calming circle against his skin. "Everything all right?" she asked the flight attendant, her voice sweet yet holding an edge, a barely hidden challenge. Lisa looked up, clearing her throat with a quick smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just making sure everyone's seated correctly. We've had some confusion with seating assignments lately." Eric's jaw clenched, but he managed a patient nod. "No confusion here. We booked these seats months ago." Caleb's voice cut through the tension as he pulled his blanket onto his lap, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Dad, Mom, look, it's so soft." He tugged at the blanket, showing it off, completely oblivious to the thickening air around him. Eric allowed himself a small smile, his son's innocent joy a balm against the uneasy scrutiny still radiating from the flight attendant. "Wonderful, honey," Mia replied, her eyes never leaving Lisa. "We're all set here," she said pointedly, directing a meaningful gaze toward the aisle, as if willing the woman to move along. But Lisa didn't leave. Instead, she nodded stiffly, holding their tickets as she glanced over her shoulder. "I'll just check with my supervisor about these seats," she said, a faint flush rising to her cheeks as she disappeared down the aisle. A quiet tension settled over the family. Eric looked over at Mia, their eyes meeting in a silent exchange, one that conveyed decades of shared experiences, small slights, and subtle reminders that some people still struggled to see beyond surface assumptions. Her hand was warm in his, grounding him. "Mama, did we do something wrong?" Caleb asked, looking up with wide, curious eyes. He'd finally noticed the unusual stiffness in his parents' posture, the strange silence that seemed to settle over them. "No, baby," Mia replied, her voice as soft and soothing as ever. She reached out, smoothing his curls. "You've done everything perfectly. We're just waiting for the flight to start." Caleb nodded, comforted by her words, though a flicker of confusion lingered in his eyes. Minutes later, Lisa returned, this time with the lead flight attendant, a man named Tom. His posture was stiff, his brows furrowed as he approached their row, holding himself with an air of forced authority. "Good evening," Tom began, his gaze shifting from Eric to Mia, and then to the empty seat beside them. "I understand there might be some confusion with your seating arrangement." Eric met his gaze with a calm but unyielding stare, his voice steady. "We've booked these seats directly with your airline. First-class seats. Row 2. A, B, and C. They were confirmed at check-in. Your gate agent even verified them. If you'd like, I can show you the confirmation email." Tom hesitated, caught off guard by the quiet firmness in Eric's voice. But he quickly recovered, offering a thin smile. "It's just that sometimes our booking system can be unclear. We want to ensure that everyone's in the proper place." Eric's patience was thinning, but he held his composure. He was painfully aware of the sideways glances, the quiet murmurs from other passengers who had taken an interest in the unfolding scene. He took a steadying breath, his grip tightening slightly on Mia's hand. "There's no confusion," Eric said, his voice resonating with quiet strength. "We belong here, just as much as anyone else." Beside him, Mia straightened, her chin lifted, her gaze unwavering. "Perhaps the only confusion," she added, her tone level and unwavering, "is why our presence here is causing so much concern." Tom's forced smile wavered. He looked over his shoulder, seemingly uncomfortable with the attention the interaction was drawing. "Maybe we could discuss this in the galley," he offered, gesturing toward the back of the cabin, his voice softening. Mia's eyes narrowed slightly. "We're comfortable here," she replied, her voice sharp and controlled. "This isn't about anyone's comfort. We're right where we're supposed to be." Caleb clutched his mother's arm. His earlier excitement dimmed, replaced by uncertainty. "Mom," he whispered, "did we do something wrong?" Mia reached over and kissed the top of his head, a fierce look of protection in her eyes as she glanced back at Tom. "No, honey," she said, her voice strong. "You did everything just right." Eric let out a long breath, feeling the simmering frustration rise within him. They'd faced subtle slights before, but today, in this beautiful cabin meant to symbolize their hard work, their success, their right to be here, it stung deeper than usual. Finally, Tom handed the tickets back, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. "Please enjoy your flight," he murmured, his tone soft, almost apologetic, but there was a tension in his expression, as though he were caught in a struggle of his own, a battle between protocol and prejudice, between duty and bias. As Tom walked away, Eric glanced at Mia, feeling both exhausted and resilient, his heart heavy yet defiant. She met his gaze, her eyes filled with a fierce pride. They were here to stay. They belonged in these seats, in this cabin, and no one, not a hesitant flight attendant, nor a judgmental stare, could ever take that from them. Eric and Mia exchanged a silent look, their expressions calm but laced with a shared frustration. Caleb had resumed his excited exploration of the seat controls, but there was an undeniable shadow over the moment, a dark cloud of unspoken assumptions that felt impossible to ignore. As the rest of the first-class passengers continued to board, Eric felt the weight of a dozen gazes cast in their direction. Each sidelong glance and quiet murmur served as a reminder that, to some, their presence here was out of place, a disruption in the expected order. Then, the flight attendant, Tom, returned, this time holding a more controlled, professional posture, though his eyes flickered with hesitation. Sir, madam, he said, clearing his throat as he addressed them. I'm sorry, but we may need to verify the seating arrangement for a final time. Would you mind? He gestured back toward the galley with a strained smile that barely masked his discomfort. Mia lifted her chin, her eyes hardening. We've already presented our tickets. What exactly needs to be verified this time? She asked, her voice cool and unyielding. Tom seemed to search for words, his gaze darting nervously over his shoulder as though seeking silent reinforcement from his colleagues. The awkwardness in his stance betrayed his discomfort, but he managed a weak smile. It's well. Our policy requires us to confirm seating assignments when there's any ambiguity. Ambiguity, Eric repeated, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. What ambiguity? Our tickets are valid. Our seats are confirmed. And we're exactly where we belong. This isn't the first time we've flown first class. And we've never encountered such scrutiny. Around them, passengers who had once feigned disinterest were now openly listening, eyes flicking between the flight attendant and the Thomas family. A businessman across the aisle lowered his phone, his expression a mixture of surprise and discomfort. A woman in an expensive scarf whispered to her seatmate, casting Eric a look that hinted at a fleeting understanding. Please, sir, Tom insisted, his voice wavering as he attempted to maintain authority. We simply want to ensure everyone's comfort and that there are no misunderstandings. Eric leaned back, his gaze unwavering. The only discomfort here, he said, his voice steady, seems to be from the implication that my family and I don't belong in these seats. Mia placed a comforting hand on Eric's arm, her fingers squeezing gently as she met the flight attendant's gaze with the same calm intensity. We're here to enjoy a family vacation, she said, her voice clear and composed. We purchased these seats. We checked in, and we boarded like everyone else. Now, if there's truly an issue, I'd appreciate it if you would be direct. A small voice broke the heavy silence, cutting through the tension. Mom, Dad, Caleb asked, his wide eyes filled with confusion. Are we still going to Paris? Mia's face softened as she turned to him, brushing his hair back with gentle fingers. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to Paris, she assured him, but beneath her gentle words was a quiet, simmering resolve. Eric drew a breath, willing himself to stay calm, to hold steady for his son. His career had given him a lifetime of practice in maintaining composure under pressure. Still, moments like this chipped away at the carefully built armor, leaving him feeling raw and exposed. Tom, now visibly uncomfortable, shifted from foot to foot, glancing over his shoulder once more before stammering. I'll just check with the supervisor one last time. As he retreated, a low murmur spread through the cabin. Eric caught the gaze of a woman sitting nearby, who offered him an apologetic smile, a small but genuine gesture of solidarity. In that moment, he felt the weight of a dozen silent witnesses, people whose expressions carried an array of emotions: discomfort, sympathy, and, in some cases, subtle complicity. Mia leaned toward Eric, her voice a low whisper. We're not going anywhere. We're here, and we're going to enjoy this flight. Eric nodded, his hand finding hers, their fingers entwining in a gesture of shared resilience. He was reminded of every struggle they had faced to reach this moment, every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every doubt and sleepless hour spent building a life that would give Caleb a world of possibility. He wouldn't let anyone take this away from them. Minutes later, Tom returned, accompanied by the head purser, Mark. Mark's face was unreadable, his gaze moving quickly from Eric to Mia, then to Caleb, who sat quietly in his seat, clutching his blanket. Good evening, Mark began, his tone polite but brisk. We'd like to invite you to discuss the seating situation privately to ensure the best experience for everyone on board. Eric felt a sharp pang of frustration. They had prepared for moments like this, had faced similar tests of their patience and dignity countless times. Yet the sting was always fresh, always painful. "There's no situation," Eric replied, his voice carrying a quiet strength that commanded attention. "We have our seats, confirmed and assigned, and we have no intention of moving. The only issue here seems to be an assumption that we somehow don't belong." Mark's mouth opened, then closed. The measured confidence in Eric's voice seemed to throw him off balance, leaving him momentarily at a loss for words. Around them, passengers had stopped pretending not to listen. Eyes that once looked away now watched intently, the entire cabin caught in a silent, simmering tension. Mia spoke next, her voice calm but firm. "I'd like to know exactly what the issue is with our tickets, since no one has yet to tell us. If it's not about our seats, and it's not about our tickets, then what exactly is it about?" The air in the cabin thickened, heavy with unspoken words and long-held prejudices that floated, unacknowledged, between the lines. Mark seemed to struggle for an answer, his professional demeanor fraying under the weight of a situation he no longer controlled. Just then, a deep voice cut through the silence. "Excuse me," the voice said, rich and commanding. A man in his 50s, seated a few rows back, had risen, his casual attire unable to mask the quiet authority that radiated from his stance. He held up a familiar blue badge, an airline ID. "I'm Captain Jack Carter," he said, his voice even and calm. "And I'd like to know exactly what protocols you're following here, because in my 25 years with this airline, I have never seen passengers questioned like this after boarding with valid tickets." Mark's face paled slightly, and Tom shifted uncomfortably beside him. Captain Carter's name held weight, his reputation legendary among the airline staff. Passengers straightened in their seats, eyes widening as they absorbed the new development. "Captain," Mark stammered, his voice suddenly shaky. "We were just ensuring we were following standard procedures." "Standard procedures?" Captain Carter echoed, his voice sharpening. "And what procedures are those, exactly?" "The ones that demand a black family verify their seats repeatedly, even after confirmation from the gate, because that's certainly not standard practice in my experience." Eric felt a surge of emotion, a deep gratitude mingled with a familiar, exhausted weariness. Here was someone who understood, who could see through the thinly veiled facade of procedure to the unspoken prejudice lurking beneath. Captain Carter turned to Eric, offering him a nod of quiet respect. "You're in the right place, sir, and you have every right to be here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Caleb's eyes widened, his fear replaced with admiration as he looked up at Captain Carter, his small hands gripping the blanket tightly. Mia squeezed Eric's hand, her gaze brimming with pride and relief. "Thank you," Eric said, his voice thick with emotion. In that moment, he felt a powerful sense of solidarity, a connection forged in the shared experience of countless silent battles fought and won. Captain Carter's words echoed through the cabin, their quiet strength reverberating in the hearts of every witness. For the first time, Eric felt a true sense of belonging, a vindication of everything he had worked for, everything he had hoped to achieve not just for himself, but for Caleb, for the future he wanted his son to inherit. And as the murmurs of approval and whispered words of solidarity spread through the cabin, Eric knew they had won something far more valuable than a simple seat. They had won a moment of validation, of unity, a reminder that they were never truly alone. A hush fell over the cabin as Captain Jack Carter stepped forward, his calm yet commanding presence filling the space with an air of undeniable authority. Eric could feel the intensity of his gaze as the captain took in every detail of the scene before him, the hesitant flight crew, the unease among the passengers, and the resolute look in Eric's eyes. "I'm sure we all want to ensure that every passenger feels welcome and respected," Captain Carter said, his tone both polite and unyielding. He turned to Mark, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But in my 25 years with this airline, I have never seen anyone questioned about their seats after already being verified at the gate. And I'd like to know why this family is being treated differently. Mark and Tom shifted uncomfortably, exchanging nervous glances. Mark's confident posture seemed to crumble under the weight of Captain Carter's steady gaze. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words faltered, replaced by a quiet, almost reluctant, "We were simply following protocol, Captain." "Protocol," Captain Carter repeated, his voice slicing through the tension. "Let me tell you something about protocol. Our policies are meant to ensure safety, respect, and dignity for all passengers, not to single out families based on appearance." Eric felt an unexpected surge of emotion, gratitude, relief, and a raw sense of justice. Captain Carter was not only calling out the injustice of the moment, but also standing up for principles that went beyond any single flight or seating assignment. Here was a man who understood, who saw the situation for what it was and was willing to stand against it. Beside him, Mia's face softened, a mixture of pride and quiet satisfaction in her expression. Her fingers laced through Eric's, their touch a silent affirmation that they were standing strong together, even under the unspoken scrutiny of those around them. Captain Carter turned to the passengers who had been watching intently, his voice resonating with conviction. "As an airline, we have a responsibility to every person who steps onto our planes, and that means treating every passenger with respect, regardless of how they look or where they come from. That's not just a policy, it's a principle." The silence that followed was almost palpable, broken only by the faint hum of the engines. The other passengers seemed to shift in their seats, some lowering their heads in embarrassment, others nodding in agreement. A businessman in a pinstripe suit leaned forward, his expression one of quiet acknowledgement. An elderly woman behind Eric and Mia murmured, "Amen to that." Captain Carter's gaze shifted back to Mark and Tom, who now looked visibly uncomfortable, as if they were suddenly aware of the eyes watching their every move. "Is there any reason, any legitimate reason at all, that this family should be questioned about their seating arrangement after already providing proof?" he asked, his tone leaving no room for misinterpretation. Mark swallowed, his voice barely a whisper. "No, Captain, no reason." "Then perhaps," Captain Carter replied, his voice soft but firm, "we can put this entire matter to rest and allow this family to enjoy their flight in peace." As the captain spoke, Caleb looked up at him with wide eyes, his earlier confusion replaced by a sense of wonder. Here was someone who stood up, someone who had the power to make things right. Eric could see the admiration in his son's gaze, and he felt his heart swell with pride. Turning his attention to Caleb, Captain Carter offered a warm smile. "You know, young man," he said, crouching slightly to meet Caleb at eye level, "when I was about your age, I dreamed of flying planes too. I faced my own challenges, but I never let them stop me. And look at me now. I've flown thousands of flights and traveled all around the world." Caleb's face lit up, his earlier fear melting away as he absorbed the captain's words. "Did you always want to be a pilot?" he asked, his voice filled with awe. Captain Carter chuckled, nodding. "Ever since I was a little boy, and someday, if you want to, you can do it too. Remember, you belong wherever your dreams take you." Mia placed a hand over her heart, blinking back tears as she watched Caleb hang on to every word. She glanced at Eric, and they exchanged a look of shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that this moment, this simple but powerful reassurance, was worth more than any first-class seat could ever be. The captain stood, straightening to his full height, and addressed the cabin once more. "If anyone has a problem with where this family is seated, I'd advise you to keep it to yourself." His tone was unyielding, his gaze firm as he swept his eyes over the passengers. Several people averted their eyes, looking away as if ashamed, while others murmured words of support. One passenger, a distinguished-looking man with silver hair, cleared his throat and nodded approvingly. "Well said, Captain," he murmured, his voice carrying through the cabin. Tom and Mark exchanged helpless glances. then took a step back, their faces flushed with embarrassment. "We apologize for any inconvenience caused," Tom said, his voice barely audible. "Please enjoy your flight." Captain Carter gave Eric a nod, a subtle gesture of solidarity and respect, before turning to address the rest of the passengers. "Thank you all for your patience. Let's remember that respect and dignity are what makes us human. And with that, let's get back to enjoying this journey." As he returned to his seat a few rows back, Captain Carter cast a final look in Caleb's direction, offering him a thumbs up and a wink. Caleb grinned, his earlier anxiety replaced by a sense of pride and confidence. Eric exhaled slowly, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. The encounter had been draining, but there was an undeniable sense of triumph in the air, a victory that was both personal and symbolic. He glanced at Mia, who squeezed his hand, her expression filled with a fierce pride. "Thank you," Eric said softly, just loud enough for Captain Carter to hear as he walked by. The captain paused, nodding in acknowledgement, his face conveying a depth of understanding that required no words. As the passengers around them finally settled in, the tension that had once filled the cabin began to dissolve, replaced by a newfound sense of unity and quiet respect. Several passengers offered nods and encouraging smiles to the Thomas family, small gestures that spoke volumes. Caleb looked up at his parents, his eyes shining. "Dad, Mom," he whispered. Captain Carter said, "I can be a pilot too." Eric knelt down to his son's level, resting a hand on his shoulder. "That's right, buddy. You can be anything you want to be. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong." Mia leaned in, brushing a tear from her cheek as she looked at her son. "And you'll have all the love and support in the world to make it happen." As the plane prepared for takeoff, the Thomas family settled into their seats, a sense of peace and pride surrounding them. They had endured the unspoken questions, the sideways glances, and the veiled suspicions, but they had risen above it all. With the quiet strength of Captain Carter's support, they knew they were not alone in their journey. They were heading to Paris, a city of beauty and dreams, and as the plane lifted off the ground, Eric felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to ensure that Caleb would grow up knowing he could belong anywhere his dreams might take him. As the plane leveled off in the sky, a new energy pulsed through the first-class cabin, a quiet but powerful current that bound the passengers together. The tension that had gripped the air earlier seemed to dissolve, replaced by a growing resolve to address what they had all witnessed. Eric felt a surge of gratitude as he glanced back at Captain Carter, who had taken his seat a few rows behind. But the most remarkable change was happening around him. Passengers who had previously looked away now seemed eager to offer their support. A businessman across the aisle leaned forward, adjusting his tie, his face marked with a serious expression. "I don't know if this means much," the man began, his voice low and sincere, "but I'm sorry for what you went through back there. I fly all the time, and I've never seen anything like that happen. It was wrong." He extended his hand. "Name's David Liu, Pacific Tech Solutions. If you ever need anything, please, don't hesitate." Eric reached out, shaking David's hand with a grateful nod. The gesture, simple yet genuine, felt like a balm on a wound he hadn't even realized had cut so deep. One by one, others spoke up. An elderly woman seated in the row behind leaned forward, her eyes bright and full of wisdom. "I may be old," she said with a warm smile, "but I've seen things like this all my life. People need to speak up. Seeing everyone stand together today gives me hope that maybe things are finally changing." She touched Mia's shoulder, a silent but heartfelt reassurance. A few seats down, a young woman who had been quietly observing the scene throughout now turned in her seat, her large sunglasses perched on top of her head. "Hi," she began, offering a smile. "I'm Jenna Reynolds. I work in corporate diversity training. Actually, this situation, it's exactly the kind of thing we talk about in the seminars I lead. Would you mind if I used this as an example? Obviously, anonymously, but It would make a powerful case study. Mia nodded, her heart swelling with pride at the collective support, at the ripple effect that Captain Carter's intervention had set into motion. Of course, if it can make a difference, please do. From her seat, the woman smiled gratefully. It's time people realize these moments aren't just rare incidents. They're a reflection of deeper issues. And the way you handled this, your dignity, well, it's inspiring. Caleb, watching and listening intently, seemed to absorb every word. His small shoulders, which had hunched in confusion and worry earlier, now straightened as he took in the steady, uplifting voices around him. Eric caught his son's eye and felt a wave of pride mixed with relief. This was what he wanted for Caleb, not just comfort or luxury, but a sense of belonging, a belief that he had every right to be in spaces like this. Just then, a man across the aisle with silver hair and an expensive-looking suit stood up, clearing his throat. "I've been flying first class for over 30 years," he said, his voice strong, filling the cabin. "And not once have I been questioned about my seat." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. What happened today was unacceptable. For one, intend to write to this airline and demand they address this incident. We can't let moments like these pass without taking action. The flight attendants who had been nearby earlier now stood at a respectful distance, their faces marked with shame. One of them, a younger woman who hadn't been involved in the initial confrontation, stepped forward, a small, apologetic smile on her face. "I wasn't involved, but I wanted to apologize on behalf of my colleagues," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's embarrassing, really. We're trained to respect every passenger. And that's not what happened here. Please accept these amenity kits as a gesture of goodwill. They're limited editions, and they include a few extras for you and your son." She knelt down to Caleb's level, handing him a sleek black case with a warm smile. "There's even a little airplane model in there, just for you." Caleb took the kit, his eyes lighting up as he looked at the unexpected gift. He glanced at his parents for approval, and Mia nodded, giving him a soft smile. Caleb clutched the kit to his chest, his earlier fear and confusion giving way to a look of pure pride. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice steady. "And thank you, Captain Carter," he added, his gaze shifting to where the captain Saturday watching quietly with a warm smile of his own. Captain Carter raised his hand in acknowledgement, offering a wink in Caleb's direction. "It's my pleasure, son. Remember, you have every right to be here, always." Caleb's small face broke into a wide grin, the memory of the captain's words settling into his heart like a promise he knew he would carry for years to come. The support rippled outward. From one passenger to another, they exchanged nods, quiet words of encouragement, and even shared contact information, business cards and phone numbers passing across the aisle as strangers became allies. The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed entirely, shifting from one of guarded silence to one of unity, solidarity, and shared purpose. An elderly woman in the back row, her voice tinged with a rich accent, spoke up next. "I was there when people were protesting for equal rights back in the 60s. To see this happen now, in 2024, it's disheartening. But this," she gestured around the cabin, at the collective show of support, "this gives me hope that maybe, one day, it'll be different for good." A businessman, who had quietly observed everything until now, leaned forward, looking at Eric. "This was a wake-up call for me. I've stayed silent too often, thinking it wasn't my place to get involved. Today showed me that silence only lets this sort of behavior continue. Thank you for showing us all how to handle this with dignity." Mia reached over and squeezed Eric's hand, a tear slipping down her cheek as she absorbed the gravity of the moment. This trip, meant to be a celebration of their hard work, had unexpectedly become a turning point, not only for them but for everyone in the cabin. At the front, Jenna Reynolds, the diversity trainer, lifted her phone. "Would you be comfortable if I wrote about this experience? I think a lot of people could learn from what happened here. She paused, giving them a kind smile. Your story could make a difference. Eric glanced at Mia, who nodded. If it helps someone else avoid this, then yes, Eric said, his voice calm and certain. Tell it. As the passengers settled back into their seats, the air around them was different, alive with the knowledge that they had been part of something bigger. This was no longer a simple flight. It was a shared experience, a stand against something wrong, and a moment of solidarity they would all carry with them long after they landed. And as Caleb nestled against his mother's side, clutching his amenity kit and the small airplane model that the younger flight attendant had given him, Eric knew that his son's first memory of flying would be filled not only with the wonder of travel but with a sense of belonging and the quiet strength of knowing that he had a right to dream big, just as anyone else did. Looking around at the faces of strangers who had become allies, Eric felt a warmth settle over him, a deep, abiding knowledge that change was possible, that sometimes it took one courageous stand to reveal the hearts of many. And as he glanced back to Captain Carter, who gave him a small, encouraging nod, Eric felt that maybe, just maybe, they were helping build a world where Caleb and everyone who came after him could find acceptance in every seat they chose to take. The flight had settled into a quiet, almost reverent calm. Passengers, once strangers, now seemed united by a shared sense of purpose and solidarity. Eric, Mia, and Caleb sat back in their seats, their hearts still racing from the earlier confrontation but beginning to ease with the warmth of the unexpected support around them. A few rows away, Captain Carter caught Eric's eye, offering him a nod and a small, reassuring smile. His calm presence felt like a shield, a reminder that not everyone turned a blind eye to prejudice, that there were people who would stand up, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it was easier to stay silent. The lead flight attendant, Mark, and his colleague Lisa, who had questioned the family's seats, now approached cautiously. Mark looked down, visibly struggling with his words, his face flushed with a mixture of regret and humility. Mr. Thomas, he began, his voice low. I want to personally apologize for how things were handled earlier. It was unprofessional and unfair. We should have welcomed you on board with the respect you deserve. I see now that we failed to do that, and for that, I am truly sorry. Lisa stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her, her expression marked by genuine shame. I take responsibility, she said, her voice wavering slightly. It wasn't right, and looking back, I'm deeply embarrassed by my actions. I acted on assumptions instead of facts, and that's on me. I hope you'll accept my apology. Eric studied their faces, seeing the raw sincerity in their eyes. He let out a slow breath, feeling the tension ease from his shoulders. It would have been easy to hold onto the anger, to let it fuel the resentment he'd built up over years of similar experiences. But something in him softened. This moment was more than a simple apology. It was a recognition, a willingness to confront mistakes. Mia spoke first, her voice steady but compassionate. Thank you for acknowledging it. It's not an easy thing to own up to mistakes. What matters now is that this doesn't happen to someone else. She reached out, her expression both kind and firm, meeting their gaze with quiet strength. Mark nodded solemnly. We're going to make sure of it. I've already submitted a report to the airline, and we'll be reviewing our training procedures. This isn't just about words, it's about ensuring we actually learn from this. Lisa's voice softened as she looked at Caleb, who had been quietly watching the exchange with wide eyes. We want to make this right for you, Caleb. I know this trip is special to you and your family. She pulled a small gift bag from behind her back, holding it out with a tentative smile. There are some special surprises in here, things that are normally reserved for our longest flights. Consider it a small gesture to say we're sorry. Caleb's face lit up, his innocent wonder returning as he took the bag with a grateful smile. Thank you, he said quietly, clutching the gift as though it were the most precious thing in the world. Lisa knelt beside him, her face level with his. her eyes glistening slightly. You deserve the best, Caleb, and we're here to make sure you feel that way for the rest of this flight. The surrounding passengers watched, nodding approvingly at the flight crew's efforts to make amends. The air had shifted from tense and fraught to something softer, more profound, a collective understanding that change didn't come just from words but from acknowledgement, from real action and accountability. Captain Carter, watching from his seat, finally rose and approached the group. His calm, steady presence seemed to radiate through the cabin, quieting the last remnants of tension. "Thank you for taking responsibility," he said, looking directly at Mark and Lisa. "It's never easy, but it's necessary." Mark nodded, his gaze meeting Captain Carter's. "We're committed to making sure this doesn't happen again. We'll be implementing immediate changes in our protocol, and this report will go straight to our senior leadership." Captain Carter looked around at the passengers, then back to the family. "It's moments like these that reveal our character, not when everything is easy, but when things get difficult. And the way you all responded, you've set a powerful example." He turned to Caleb, a warm smile breaking through his serious expression. "And young man, I hope you know how proud your parents are of you. They handled today with dignity, and that's something worth remembering." Caleb beamed, his face glowing with pride as he clutched his amenity kit and new gifts. "Thank you, Captain Carter," he replied, his voice filled with admiration. A few seats away, Jenna, the diversity trainer, leaned toward Eric, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she began, her voice soft, "this experience has been eye-opening for a lot of us. It's given me a fresh perspective on the work I do. Sometimes it takes seeing it firsthand to really understand how deep these issues go." She handed Eric her business card, her gaze steady. "If you ever want to collaborate, I'd be honored to work with you on ways to make these conversations more meaningful." Eric accepted her card with a grateful nod. "I'd like that. Thank you, Jenna. It means a lot to have someone willing to tackle this alongside us." As the flight continued, the mood in the cabin grew lighter, a newfound camaraderie settling over the passengers. They exchanged quiet words of encouragement, each one offering their own small gesture of support, their own commitment to standing against the quiet, everyday prejudice they had just witnessed. The transformation was tangible, a shift from silence to solidarity, from discomfort to action. Caleb, still in awe, turned to his parents, his eyes shining with newfound confidence. "Mom, Dad," he whispered, "this was supposed to be our celebration trip, right?" Mia smiled, her heart swelling with love as she took her son's hand. "Yes, honey, it was, and it still is." Eric looked out the window, watching the clouds drift by as they soared toward Paris. "But it's also something more, Caleb," he said softly. "Today, you saw what it means to stand up for what's right. You saw that when people work together, they can make a difference." Caleb nodded thoughtfully, his young mind processing everything he had witnessed. He reached over, gripping Captain Carter's gift tightly. "I want to be like Captain Carter when I grow up. I want to help people too." Eric placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his heart swelling with pride. "And you can, son. Wherever you go, whatever you choose to do, you can make a difference just like Captain Carter did today." The plane hummed gently as it glided through the sky, carrying them closer to their destination, to the city of lights and dreams. But as they sat there, basking in the newfound warmth of the cabin, Eric knew they had already experienced a journey far more profound than any they had planned. As they settled back into their seats, Eric felt Mia's hand slip into his, her grip warm and reassuring. "We've come a long way," she whispered, her eyes brimming with pride and relief. "And look at us now." Eric squeezed her hand, his gaze resting on Caleb's smiling face. "Yes," he replied, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "And we're just getting started." The family settled into their seats, finally able to relax, to enjoy the moment. Around them, the cabin had transformed from a place of tension to a place of understanding. a shared space where respect and unity had triumphed over prejudice. And as Caleb lay back, holding his amenity kit like a cherished treasure, he closed his eyes with a smile, knowing that his family had turned this flight into something extraordinary, a celebration not only of their success but of their courage, their resilience, and the hope they had inspired in everyone around them. The hum of the engines was a soothing backdrop as the cabin settled into a new rhythm, a unity forged from a shared experience that had opened eyes, changed minds, and lifted spirits. The passengers, once strangers, now exchanged glances and warm nods, each of them quietly aware that they had witnessed something powerful together. Eric gazed out the window, the blanket of clouds below reminding him how high they had come, not just in altitude, but in the journey they had shared. He had taken many flights before, but none had carried this weight, this resonance. Today, they had stood as a family against prejudice. And in doing so, they had sparked something far greater. Next to him, Caleb was busy unwrapping his amenity kit, his small fingers exploring every item like it was a treasure chest. Mia watched him with a smile, pride and tenderness in her eyes as she saw her son embracing the moment, his earlier fear replaced by joy and confidence. Captain Carter walked over once more, his calm gaze landing on Caleb with a warm smile. "How's it going, young man? Are you enjoying those pilot wings?" Caleb beamed, holding up the shiny wings pinned to his shirt. "Yes, Captain, I love them. I want to be a pilot. Just like you." Captain Carter chuckled, his eyes softening. "Well, you've got the heart for it. And let me tell you, that's the most important part. You see, flying a plane isn't just about knowing how to steer, it's about being able to rise above challenges, even when things get tough." Mia leaned in, her voice soft. "Thank you, Captain, for everything. Today meant the world to us, especially to Caleb. You've shown him what true strength looks like." Captain Carter met her gaze, a quiet understanding passing between them. "It's my honor, and as someone who's faced a few challenges of my own, I know how much it matters to have someone in your corner." He glanced around the cabin, his eyes lingering on the faces of those who had stood by the family. Today was about more than just seats, it was about standing together, showing the next generation that there's a better way. Caleb, listening intently, looked up at his parents with wide eyes. "Mom, Dad, I don't think I'll ever forget this." Eric reached over, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "I hope you don't, buddy, because what you learned today is something that will stay with you for the rest of your life. There will always be people who doubt you, but when you stand tall, like Captain Carter did, you remind others that you belong." As Captain Carter turned to leave, he placed a gentle hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Remember, you're going to do great things. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Caleb's eyes sparkled with pride, and he nodded, his young face filled with a determination that was new, a seed of courage and hope that had taken root today. Across the aisle, the businessman David Liu leaned over, his face marked with thoughtfulness. "You know," he said to Eric, "I travel a lot for work, and I've seen situations like this too many times, actually, but this was different. It made me realize I can do more than just watch from the sidelines." Eric looked at him, nodding. "Thank you, David. Takes courage to stand up, especially when it's easier to look away." Today was a reminder that we all have a role to play in these moments. David nodded, a newfound resolve in his eyes. "Absolutely. I'll be looking at my own company's policies, making sure we're not just paying lip service to equality." Today has been a wake-up call. From a few rows ahead, Jenna Reynolds, the diversity trainer, turned in her seat, her expression one of earnest conviction. "I think this experience will inspire more than just policy changes. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels they can belong." She held up her phone, showing Eric a post she had written about the incident. The response online has been overwhelming. People are sharing their own stories, talking about how important it is to challenge assumptions and support one another. Mia's face softened, her heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you, Jenna. That means so much. If sharing our experience can help others, then today was more than worth it. Jenna smiled, slipping her phone back into her bag. If we can all bring even a fraction of this experience back to our own circles, we'll be doing something good. Thank you for your grace through all of this. You've shown a lot of people what resilience really looks like. Just then, the elderly woman who had spoken up earlier approached from the row behind. Her eyes were warm, filled with a depth of wisdom born from decades of lived experience. She placed a gentle hand on Mia's shoulder, her gaze full of admiration. I just want you to know, she said softly, that I am so proud of you all. Watching your family today, it's given me hope that maybe, just maybe, things will be better for my grandchildren. Thank you for showing the world what dignity looks like. Mia took her hand, her own eyes filling with emotion. Thank you. That means more than words can say. Caleb looked up at the elderly woman, his innocent gaze curious. Did you ever want to change things, too? He asked. The woman chuckled, nodding. Yes, I did. I've marched, I've protested, and I've spoken up whenever I could. And seeing all of you here today, standing together, that's what I dreamed of all those years ago. We're part of something bigger than ourselves. And that's worth everything. Caleb absorbed her words, his small face thoughtful as he realized that he was part of a moment that stretched beyond this flight. Beyond this single day, it was a moment that connected generations, a reminder of the journey that still lay ahead. As the woman returned to her seat, Eric and Mia exchanged a look, each of them feeling a powerful sense of fulfillment, a validation of every sacrifice they had made to be here, in this place, together as a family. Just then, a voice crackled over the intercom, signaling that they would soon begin their descent. The magic of Paris awaited them, the city they had dreamed of sharing with Caleb, a place that held promises of beauty, wonder, and inspiration. But as they prepared to land, Eric knew that they had already experienced something extraordinary, an awakening, a collective stand against prejudice, a moment that would ripple through their lives and the lives of those around them. Mia leaned in close to Eric, her voice a soft whisper. This isn't the journey we planned, but I think it's the one we needed. Eric nodded, squeezing her hand, his eyes filled with the same quiet determination that had guided them through the challenges they had faced. You're right, and whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Caleb looked up, clutching his amenity kit, his face glowing with pride. I think this was the best flight ever, he said, his voice full of conviction. Mia and Eric laughed softly, their hearts swelling with love as they gazed at their son. We think so too, sweetheart, Mia said, her voice warm, as the plane descended through the clouds. A golden light bathed the cabin, a reminder of the dawn that awaited them, of new beginnings and boundless possibilities. And as Eric looked around at the faces of strangers who had become allies, he knew they were stepping into a new chapter, not just of this journey, but of their lives. They had come together in an unlikely place, had shared their strength, their voices, and their hope, and as the wheels touched down on the tarmac, he felt certain of one thing. They were ready for whatever lay ahead, as a family, as a community, and as part of a world moving forward. One courageous moment at a time, the flight touched down smoothly in Paris, a city glistening with promise as sunlight streamed through the plane's windows. Eric, Mia, and Caleb sat quietly, each of them reflecting on the events that had transformed their journey into something unforgettable. What had begun as a long-awaited family trip had turned into a profound lesson in resilience, solidarity, and the strength found in standing together. As the cabin lights dimmed, the flight attendants moved through the aisles, preparing the passengers to disembark. Mark, the lead flight attendant, approached their row once more, his face humbled and sincere. Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, he began softly, I want to thank you again. Your dignity taught us all something today. I've included a full report of the incident, and I've requested additional training for our crew. I know that doesn't erase what happened, but I hope it prevents it from happening to someone else." Eric nodded, meeting Mark's gaze with a steady calm. "Thank you. Real change starts when people take responsibility. We appreciate your effort to make things right." With a final respectful nod, Mark moved down the aisle, visibly carrying the weight of what he'd learned. Caleb watched him go, his young mind absorbing the quiet power of seeing someone take responsibility for their mistakes. The words his parents had often spoken to him about respect, courage, and integrity felt more real than ever. As the passengers prepared to stand, a remarkable thing happened. One by one, they waited, allowing the Thomas family to exit first, not out of pity or guilt, but out of respect. The aisle became a path of silent solidarity, each nod and smile a testament to the strength they had shown and the inspiration they had ignited. Caleb held his parents' hands as they rose, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the support surrounding them. He looked up at his father, his small face lit with pride. "Dad, this is amazing. They're waiting for us." Eric squeezed his son's hand, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Yes, son, it's amazing what happens when people come together to do what's right." As they stepped into the aisle, a gentle murmur of approval followed them, passengers exchanging smiles and nods of encouragement. David Liu, the businessman who had spoken up for them, caught Eric's eye and gave him a thumbs up, a gesture of camaraderie that transcended words. Eric returned the nod, silently grateful for the kindness and courage David had shown. Ahead of them, Captain Carter waited at the entrance to the jet bridge, his calm, reassuring presence a steady anchor. As Eric, Mia, and Caleb approached, he stepped forward, extending his hand with a warm smile. "Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this journey with you," Captain Carter said, his eyes filled with genuine warmth. "It's moments like these that remind me why I do what I do." Eric shook his hand firmly, his voice thick with emotion. "We owe you so much, Captain. You didn't have to step in, but you did, and that means everything." Captain Carter's expression softened, and he glanced at Caleb, a glint of admiration in his gaze. "Your son asked me about becoming a pilot," he said, reaching into his pocket. "When he's ready, give me a call." He handed Eric a business card. "I run a mentorship program for young people interested in aviation. Caleb would be welcome whenever he's ready to pursue his dreams." Caleb's face lit up, his hand reaching out eagerly for the card. He turned to his parents, his voice filled with awe. "Mom, Dad, did you hear that? Captain Carter's going to help me become a pilot." Mia brushed a tear from her cheek, her smile radiant. "Yes, honey, we heard, and we couldn't be prouder of you." As they stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal, a new sense of purpose filled the air around them. The passengers who had witnessed the moment shared small words of encouragement, handshakes, and hugs, creating a ripple of connection that felt as real as the journey itself. Jenna Reynolds, the diversity trainer, approached with her own business card, handing it to Eric with a look of determination. "If you ever want to partner on corporate programs or even just to share ideas, please reach out. Today's experience, it's changed the way I see my work. Thank you for showing us all what courage looks like." Eric accepted the card, deeply moved. "Thank you, Jenna. I think we all have the power to make a difference, no matter where we are." They made their way toward customs, the terminal alive with travelers. Yet the Thomas family walked with a quiet dignity. Carrying more than just luggage, they carried the strength of the support they had found, the unity they had ignited, and the hope they had instilled. As they approached the customs line, Caleb clutched his amenity kit and the shiny pilot wings Captain Carter had given him. He looked up at his parents, his eyes filled with the confidence and pride of someone who had seen, firsthand, the power of solidarity. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice filled with a newfound certainty. "When I grow up, I want to be like Captain Carter. I want to help people stand up for what's right." Eric placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his heart full. You already are. Caleb, you showed us today that courage doesn't have an age limit. And with that heart of yours, you'll do great things. They walked toward the line, stepping into their next adventure. But something had shifted within them, a profound sense of belonging that went beyond any first-class seat or luxury. They had discovered, through adversity, a community of allies, people who were willing to speak up, to connect, and to share in the dream of a world that saw everyone's worth. As the Parisian sun streamed through the airport's massive windows, casting golden beams across the floor, Eric felt a quiet gratitude fill his chest. This journey hadn't unfolded as they had planned, but perhaps that was what made it meaningful. Mia slipped her hand into his, and they exchanged a glance that held years of shared dreams, triumphs, and sacrifices. She gave him a soft smile, her eyes bright with pride. This wasn't the trip we planned, she whispered, but it was the journey we needed. Eric nodded, his gaze resting on Caleb as he stood a little taller, his pilot wings gleaming on his chest. And maybe it's the journey the world needed too, as they stepped forward, ready to embrace all the wonders that Paris had to offer. They carried with them not only the promise of their dreams but the knowledge that change was possible, that in moments of quiet strength, dignity, and unity, people could make a difference, one courageous step at a time. And somewhere behind them, as the plane prepared for its next flight, its first-class cabin held the memory of their journey, a story of resilience, respect, and a stand taken at 30,000 feet.